little pamphlet. Looks like this. Says Champagne, Green Hungarian, Sauterne, Rhone, Tokay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cream Sherry, and so forth on the cover. But it's by Amarine and Singleton. Amarine and Singleton. And it's a bibliography of bibliographies, or a list of bibliographies. In other words, it's a source material where you find references to the literature. It runs to 39 pages, probably 30,000 references altogether. If you really get stuck for someplace to look for information, this is the place to start. So that goes back in that lecture on that subject. To show you that there is an interest in wine tasting, seems to be growing, there are in the library 2 books by Norman Goat on tasting. They're in French. So you have to learn French for that. But the one that I wanted to point out, which I had laying on my desk, is by Marascalchi, and it's in Italian. And it's called The Tasting and Appreciation of Wine, published in 1968. It's the 4th edition. It has quite a number of useful words. If you don't get anything else out of it, you could probably get something about the words and so forth. And it has quite a lengthy chapter about scorecards and so forth. I think worth looking at. I'll have it put back in the library. It belongs to the main library, not to our library. And then I ran across Cernigiotto's new scorecard, which has some interesting new features, which I think may be useful, and try and get a graduate student to work on this next year. I don't agree with all the phrases because I don't think they have meaning in English the way they stand, but I think they could be made to have meaning. The visual aspects were divided between fluidity, limpidity, color, and vivacity. I think I know mostly what those mean. If they were, they're each worth 1 point. If they were excellent, that is, if they were perfect, they would multiply them by 1.25. So this would be 1.25, this would be 1.25, 1.25. So the maximum score for visual aspects would be 5, because each one of these ones would be multiplied by 1.25, and that would add up to 5. If they were just good, they would add up to 4. If they were mediocre, they would add up to 3. And if they were poor, they would add up to 1. The odor is also divided into 4 aspects: finesse, intensity, harmony, and freshness. I'm not sure that I know the difference between finesse and harmony, but there may be a difference. I think I know what freshness and intensity is. These also are all worth 1. And if they rate excellent, they're multiplied by 1.25. So this would be 1.25, 1.25, 1.25, 1.25. So the maximum point score on odor is 5. On taste, they again have divided it up into 4 categories: body, alcohol, harmony, and intensity. And in this one, as we've indicated, we think body is integrally related to alcohol, so I wouldn't be able to find a meaning for those. These are again worth 1, and the same score things are used. So the maximum score here is 5. So that's 15 points for these. Then they have 3 general characteristics. One they call sève, or in Italian retrogusto, which really means aftertaste, or the end of the taste. But they've given themselves the French word, which I have another idea of the meaning of that. Typicalness, I think that's all right. And general impression, we already used that. If it's excellent, they give them 5 for these 3. If it was good, they would give them 4. So the maximum score would be 5, 5, and 5, and this would be 15 plus 15 over here. Would give them a total scorecard of 30 points. A little bit more than I think you could normally judge, but if they took out alcohol here, or body, one of the 2, and maybe one of these visual things here, they'd take out 10 points, and then it would be 20. So I think there is something to be said for this kind of a scorecard. We try it out maybe on next year's class. You didn't get a lecture outline last time. There's a few extras here for 7 and 8. And we'll keep going on France at the bottom of page 2. This will be good preparation for the ones that have the laboratories today and Monday. Burgundy is not a big region, as many people think. It really rather small region. About in Burgundy proper, the center of Burgundy, the heart of Burgundy, maybe only about 25 miles long. And most of the vineyards in that particular area are up on the slopes, so that there's not very many grapes compared to the total agricultural land in Burgundy. We'll speak about several regions and how complicated Burgundy is. The little northern region, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. I guess I have these not listed, so I'll do it right now. The top little region, which is much smaller than that, is Chablis. We're going to have one case today. Chablis is somewhere between 600 and 1,000 acres of legitimate, true Chablis. There's a little bit around it, can be called Petit Chablis, the area around here. But the main area is very small. The appellation controllee is on two things. One, it's Chablis by itself, or it can be called Chablis Grand Cru, which means first-class wine, and then give one of 6 names, 6 vineyards. So they're not very big, since the whole area is less than 1,000 acres. These 6 vineyards vary in size from a few acres to 15 or 20 acres. And the appellation is on the vineyard, in this case here. Appellation is on the vineyard, that is the control, the government control is on the vineyard. These are wines of low alcohol, low color, all made from Chardonnay. It may be a disappearing district because they've had an awful lot of hard work keeping the hailstorms out of there. They've had nothing but hailstorms since World War II. Something must have happened in the atmosphere to that. There's far more Chablis made in California than they ever thought about making in the whole area of Chablis. I don't think it was ever a very great wine because of its cold climatic conditions. The French themselves call it a fish wine, wine to eat with fish, and they pay quite good sums of money for it. But it's only 11.5% alcohol. They claim it has a steely character or rocky character, and I've never been able to find that. They even have a fancy word for it. So much then for that. Now the rest of the district is this main area running from Dijon down to Beaune, the area of about 30 miles. This is probably the highest priced agricultural land in the world at the present time. We think that we're paying big prices when we pay $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 an acre for agricultural land in California. Not very long ago, one of the large wineries or vineyards wanted to buy a little piece of Montrachet, and they spent the equivalent of about $50,000 an acre in order to get that little piece of Montrachet. And prices higher than that have been paid for wines there. Whether they're worth it or not is another question. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just telling you what the prices are that have been paid. So, in fact, the name has been known for a long time. This whole slope from here to here and it says exactly what I'm talking about. It's called the Côte d'Or, the slope of gold, and the gold is the wine that's made there, and it's been profitable for more than 1,000 years to various people. And you only have to go and see the beautiful homes and estates and the care that the vineyards have and so forth to realize that it is. Now the variety Pinot Noir is about 1,000 years old, variously spelled, the red grape. Until the last century, that is until the 19th century, there was quite a bit of Gamay still growing there, and there's still some of it. There was some Chardonnay and some Aligoté. The Gamay is nearly all gone, maybe not all of it gone, but the Chardonnay and the Aligoté still exist, both of them together. Any region that has had a long history of one variety of apples or peaches or apricots or grapes develops lots of varieties or sorts or clonal selections. And that's no less true here. There are some 55 different Pinot Noir listings in the amphilographies, and a good many of those are listed by the government for the laws controlling this district. So you don't expect all these wines to be the same because they're using different clones. Some of them want early ripening grapes, and so they're planting Meuniers, which ripens earlier than the normal Pinot Noir. Some of them have the little berry Pinot Noirs, and others want the large berried Pinot Noirs. There are still a few red juiced Pinot Noirs left in the region. So when you find these differences between one vineyard and the next, the first thing I look for is there some difference in the varietal planting in one vineyard than another. And in the whites, I think that's the big point of difference, or at least one of the points of difference. Now, the Gamay the prejudice against the Gamay is it's too cold for it, and it doesn't really ripen. The same thing is true of Pinot Noir, but it responds better to having added sugar. So in Pinot Noir, we have a grape that can stand some extra sugar without losing all of its character, as you'll see in the laboratory today, or Monday. The Gamay doesn't respond that way. If you sugar a Gamay, it comes out to be very thin. The result is that the Gamay has practically disappeared from Burgundy proper. There's still a lot of Gamay down in this district down in here, district called Beaujolais. And Mâconnais and Chalonnais, we won't go into the details of it. There's still a lot of Gamay down there, but Pinot Noir is now generally the most favored one. They have summer rainfall, and it's in Region 1 most years. Occasionally we'll get up to be Region 2. They have a lot of virus diseases, and this is a real problem for you because the virus diseases delay maturity. And since the Pinot Noir is already suffering from lack of sugar, this delay in maturity has reduced the quality. The virus disease is what they call short node, or in French, cornouille, or red leaf it's called in California, where it also reduces or delays the maturity and reduces the sugar content. There is a book in the library which I referred to here, André Simon's The Noble Grapes and Fine Wines of France. There's a beautiful picture in there of a vineyard in the middle of the district, right about here, called Clos Vougeot. Up until the French Revolution, it belonged to a monastic order, and then it was secularized, and now there are about 55 proprietors of that one vineyard. The chateau, the old chateau at Clos Vougeot, belongs to a wine tasting organization called the Chevaliers de Tastevin. That's not important. The picture, though, shows this beautiful chateau. I should have gotten a blown-up copy of it for you, but you can look it up in the book. And as you look out over the vineyard of Clos Vougeot, all 100 acres of it there, you see this whole area that's red. Well, that's all infested with red leaf virus, and it never ripens properly and always makes second-rate Burgundy. Until they get rid of the viruses, Burgundies are going to be even more variable than they've been in the past, because the vines that do not have the red leaf in that vineyard are going to be perfectly normal. The vines that have red leaf are going to be bad. And this is one of the main points to learn about Burgundy, that as a consumer and also as people interested in technology, that Burgundies vary all over the map. Because the first reason they vary, of course, is the virus problem, which I just indicated. The second problem is the clonal problem, which I've also indicated. And the third problem is the small sizes. In Burgundy, the Napoleonic Code applies, as it does in Louisiana and this country, and the physical property is divided among all the children. That means that if a family, there were 5 children, and the parents die, each of the children get an equal part of the property of the vineyard. So there are places in Burgundy where one person will own a single row of grapes, and the row next to it will belong to his uncle or his cousin, and the row next to it will belong to somebody else. So he may only make 1 or 2 or 3 barrels of wine a year from his little half acre or quarter of an acre of grapes. And since these are all peasant growers, there is a small-sized vineyard, and then you have what goes along with that, different standards of cultivation and pruning, and different standards of winemaking. Now, and different standards of aging. And different standards of quality control. One man makes 4 barrels. 3 of them are good, and 1 of them is bad. He's got the courage of his convictions. He sells the bad barrel to his enemies, and he saves the 3 good barrels for his friends to sell to. Because the properties are very small, more than 90% of the winemakers of Burgundy cannot get together enough wine to make a commercial sale on their own. So they have to sell the wine to somebody else. The wine grower, who is also the wine maker, does not sell the wine because he doesn't have enough. He's only got a barrel, which is a few dozen bottles. He can't gear up to filtering, to taking care of it. And then who's he going to sell it to? It's not hardly worth a trip to Paris to try to peddle the wine. And so he sells it to a merchant or somebody else. Well, this is what makes Burgundy a very dangerous business. And anybody that thinks they know Burgundy ought to pause for a little bit about it. We're Mr. Shipper X. And we buy from 5 different vineyards here. We'll say this is a Pomar. The afternoon class is going to have a Pomar. So we buy from winery A, we buy 5 barrels. From winery B, we buy 1 barrel. From winery C, we buy 2 barrels. From winery D, we buy 10 barrels. And winery E, we buy 1 barrel. And altogether, we get 13, 14, we get 19 barrels of wine. 20 barrels of wine, 20 times 50 is 1,000 gallons, 2,500 bottles, 200 cases. Well, that's at least something to sell. You can go to Paris and peddle 10 cases at this restaurant, 10 cases at that restaurant, and justify the expense. Shipper Y over here does not buy anything from A, but he buys 10 cases from B, 10 barrels from B. He buys 5 from here, he buys 1 from here, that's 16, he buys 2 from here. So he gets these, let's say 19 cases, he buys 3 from here. So here we have 3, 4, 9, 19. He's got 19 barrels, 1,000 gallons, 200 cases of wine, but his Pomar is not going to be the same as the other guy's Pomar. Well, when you find that there's more than 150 different people making wine in Pomar, and each one of these shippers is buying different amounts from each one, and they're all different because they come from Different cultivation and pruning, different time of harvesting, I didn't mention that. Different processing, some of them leave them on the skins longer. Some of them put them in small barrels, some of them put them in large barrels, and some of them siphon off the bad barrels and only sell the good barrels to the shippers and so forth. You can see the possibilities are almost infinite for different qualities of Burgundy. So it is very hard to predict ahead of time what a Burgundy is going to be like, even though it has the most prestigious name, and it's a very good year for the reasons that I've just given you. That's the problem I was making up at the top there. Now the three-tier industry I think is worth saying a word about, because it resembles in some cases California's situation. There are a number of large shippers who buy wines from all over the district and sell them as district wines, Burgundy. And that's about all they sell, just Burgundy, Chablis, Beaujolais. Not very much Chablis. But most people will sell village wines. And you can buy on the market just wines called Pommard, or even bigger area, Beaune, or big area, Rhone, Romani, and so forth. These are areas of 100, 200 acres apiece, and there's a lot of wine that's not going to be sold with the vineyard name on it at all. It's just going to be sold as the village name. Now, the government has made it possible for us to make a difference between it. If the wine says Pommard, for example, just Pommard, which is a village, it will have a certain standard for level of crop. It can be any place in the district of Pommard. Let's say here's the district of Pommard. District is delimited. The production cannot be, let's say it's limited to 35 hectoliters per hectare. And it has to be produced by the usual and true methods. And the minimum alcohol is 10.5. Now, if they have too big a crop, or they produce more than 35 hectoliters per hectare, or if they don't use the usual methods, or if the minimum alcohol goes below 10.5, then they can no longer call it Pommard. They have to call it by the next lower appellation, and that's Bourguignon. So anything out of this whole great big district that I put there can be called Burgundy. And it is usually wines that will not conform to a village appellation. These are Burgundies you can only get $2 to $3 a bottle for, if that. Whereas vineyard names you can get from $3 to $6 a bottle for. So it's to the producer's advantage to give it a village name, which has higher standards than does the regional name. Now, if he gives it a vineyard name in addition, Les Epinaux, is a famous vineyard in Loire, we'll say that's Les Epinaux. The same things apply, only the standards are different. You can't produce quite as much. The district is smaller. It's a smaller district. The production per hectare is only 30 hectoliters per hectare. And the minimum alcohol is 11 or 11.5. I think it's 11 in this particular case. So you have to have a better wine to be called Les Epinaux than you do to be called Pommard. And Pommard is going to be a better wine than is Burgundy itself, or Bourguignon. So we have this village vineyard thing, and that complicates it because Pommards are theoretically not as good as the vineyard Pommard Les Epinaux. But if you found over here a man that had a few acres of Pommard Les Epinaux, and he was a bad winemaker, he might make a Les Epinaux which stank, moldy barrels and vinegar and everything, and yet it would conform to these standards here, so he could call it Les Epinaux. And you might find a negociant who bought only very carefully from the best little growers, and he put together a Pommard which might be better than the other man's Les Epinaux. So I want to put the fear of God into buyers of Burgundy. And that's one reason for preferring Bordeaux, because in Bordeaux you know what you're getting. When you get Chateau Grand Puy Lacoste, you get Grand Puy Lacoste. You don't get anything else. And the vineyards are very large in Bordeaux, whereas they're very small in Burgundy. Nevertheless, I'll admit there are some good things about it. Well, there are large shippers, blenders. There are medium shipper growers, blenders. And then there are a few growers who make the wine and bottle it themselves. And I'll tell you a little story about that now. The French law on estate bottling is not like the American law on estate bottling. When it says that it's going to be bottled at the estate, it means it will be bottled at the estate. So one of our friends, a shipper, Alexis Lachine, was buying from these little small people. And yet if he took the wine into Beaune or into Dijon and filtered it, and fined it, and bottled it in Dijon, it could no longer be called estate bottle. So he got a great big truck. He still has it, still working. Got a great big truck, and in the truck he put refrigeration equipment, he put filters, he put a laboratory, and he went to the estate, filtered the wine, fined the wine, did everything to it that needed to be done, and then bottled the wine at the estate. Then it moved on to the next vineyard 2 blocks down the road and did the same thing. And the government was powerless to stop him. It was estate bottled. He bottled it at the estate. But it was all bottled with the same equipment, the same machine and everything. And if a little bit of wine got from one estate to the other, I don't think anybody knew anything about it. Well, this shows then the complicated appellation of origin laws. The problem that the French face is whether to reduce the number of named appellations or not. There are 600 named vineyards in this area. Nobody can possibly know all of the 600 named vineyards, plus more than 20,000 growers who make wine. If there was no blending going on at all, and you had 600 vineyards, and many of the vineyards divided into 30, 40, or 50 people, Clos Vougeot and more than 50 people, you can see that they're going to have 100,000 wines or more. Different wines, every year. Every year. Now the Germans have, as I will point out on Monday, the Germans have taken hold of this problem and have arbitrarily ruled that no wines will be allowed to have a vineyard appellation in Germany after last July the 1st that don't have at least 12.5 acres in the vineyard, period. That's the minimum size they will permit for vineyard bottling. So you will not find any more Berncastel Doctor. It'll be Berncastel Doctor something else because Berncastel Doctor isn't a big enough vineyard to justify that label. And there will be some other changes, quite a number of other changes in the German wines coming into this country. The French have been looking at this same problem as to whether or not they really should have so many different appellations in the district. You can argue the question both ways. The problem of clarification. We still have problems with Chardonnay in California, but I think most people have learned how to handle Chardonnay and get it clear. But Pinot Noir represents a very specialized problem. It's difficult to make, difficult to pick at the right time first, difficult to make. You have to have the temperature of fermentation up higher than normal, but not too high. And then you have to just find out whether or not you need a malolactic fermentation and how you're going to get the malolactic fermentation stopped. And they obviously haven't solved this problem. I got a free trip to France here a few years ago just to tell somebody how to use a germ-proof filter because his wines on the San Francisco market were all gassy from malolactic fermentation. I wrote him, I said there was no need for the trip. I'm perfectly willing to give him the advice free. Just learn how to sterilize a germ-proof filter and use it properly and you won't have any more malolactic fermentation in the bottle. Well, he wasn't sure, and so I went and physically showed him how to do it, and so far he hasn't had any problems. Maybe I should try and pray that he has a problem, so I'll get another trip too. At any rate, the malolactic fermentation is a problem because if it continues in the bottles get gassy. And as a matter of fact, this is the basis of Louis Pasteur's Études sur le vin, his book on the studies on wine. Napoleon III met Pasteur in the 1860s sometime, and he then wrote him a letter, a very famous letter, showing that the government can influence research. He said, what can we do for Burgundy because they're all getting gassy on the English market? And that problem is still with them today. They've learned how to, most people have learned how to get away with it, but every once in a while you get a gassy bottle of Burgundy. We had one 2 years ago in the class that preceded this class, course number preceding this one. The wine was gassy right in the laboratory when we opened the bottle. So they have to do something. They have to get the wines free of bacteria, and the only way we know to do it at the present time is germ-proof filtration, or millipouring, that you'll learn about next quarter from Professor Berg. On the other hand, all of these filtration processes are big aeration processes. And Pinot Noir wines are rather delicate to start with. And then you start aerating them through 2 filters at least. You have to have a rough filtration before you use the millipour filtration. And as the French say, the wines come apart. They fall apart. They have a special phrase for that. And I think that may be true. Chaptalization, the sugaring represents a problem. I've already indicated they can't use it for Gamay. They do use it, but some places they use it too much. If the wine is hot, burny, it's probably been chaptalized. It doesn't have any smell usually, except the extra alcohol, because they use dry sugar for the process. Now, some recent things that have been going on besides germ-proof filtration is color extraction by heating the grapes. The crushed grapes are crushed and then heated up to about 100 Fahrenheit or a little higher than 100 Fahrenheit, 35 centigrade to 40 centigrade, and left for 6 to 12 hours. This is to facilitate getting color extraction, and I think also kills a good many of the malolactic bacteria, so that they claim they get cleaner fermentations and that the wines are easier to stabilize. Their opponents, and this represents the University of Dijon, their opponents, who are some of the best wine merchants, who are also winemakers, say that it gives the wine a heated taste and they don't like the flavor of it. So we have 2 schools of thought there, just like we had in Bordeaux, whether to press early or to press late. We have this problem in Burgundy. As near as I can tell, as much as 1/3 of the Burgundies may be heated at the present time. That's a sizable amount. We don't really know exactly because a lot of people will not admit that they use any heat for extraction. Now, what is a good Burgundy? What makes it good, and so forth? First of all, I think it's the ripe grape odor of the Pinot Noir. If it doesn't have a ripe grape odor, I don't think it really is a Burgundy. It doesn't have that aromatic or spicy character that a Cabernet has, or Merlot, or Malbec. It's only medium in color. Even with all the heating they can do, and all the punching down they can do, or the warm fermentations and so forth, no matter how much chaptalization they use, the Burgundies are not going to have a very big color. As I pointed out in the class this morning, it is simply not true, even though it's common knowledge in California that Burgundies have more color than Clarets. That may have been true a couple hundred years ago, but even then I doubt that, because Burgundies were regularly mixed with red and white grapes together as late as 100 years ago. I don't know where the idea came that Burgundies are dark in color and Clarets are light in color. The opposite is more often the case. The Pinot Noir odor itself is a ripe grape odor, but even if it's not a ripe grape odor, it has what I call the melon-like or fig-like odor, which is the same kind of odor you get in Chardonnay. I don't know where the ripe grape odor leaves off and where the varietal odor takes on. Professor Ferret and the other people who studied this question say that the best years in Burgundy have been the years when the grapes had a little passeurage. That means that they begin to shrivel slightly, and that the growers didn't measure the sugar content in the old days. They just kept looking at the grapes until they showed a few creases on the skins, and it was the beginning of the shriveling of the berry. And that's when they picked the grapes. That was when the good... In the years when it rained and the grapes never shriveled, they had poor quality. And the years where they had slight shriveling of the grapes, then they had better quality. They mature very rapidly. They do not have high tannin contents. Even if you leave them a week on the skins, they are not high in tannin content. They mature 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. There may be occasional ones that have lasted longer, but in my opinion, they begin to show their age. There are some things that get better with age, but Burgundies are not one of those things in the world that get better with age. And the negative things are that the chaptalization is too much in many cases. They get hot. Another thing, they get an unbalanced alcohol acid character, that they're acid and they're alcoholic at the same time. And this is not very good. And that they're gassy, that's the malolactic fermentation going on in the bottle. And the cooked flavor is when they've been heated too much. Those are all negative factors that you get in Burgundy wines. In the white wines, in Chablis, that you expect to have them a slight green color, to be tart. The word low is left out after Chablis. It's low varietal, not varietal, but low varietal. Otherwise, the next line doesn't have any meaning. And the negative characteristic on those is having SO2, or being too alcoholic, or too low in acid. That would be negative factors for Chablis. Whereas in Meursault, you expect them to be less tart. This is a southern part of Burgundy vineyard, Meursault. And to have more varietal character, and you don't want them to have any SO2 character. And the best white Burgundies, the ones that everybody agrees are perhaps the best white wines made in France, are the ones called Montrachet, or Corton Charlemagne is another one in another district nearby. They have to the extreme the ripe grape odor of the Chardonnay, the fig-like odor I sometimes call it, and they're rather high in alcohol, full gold colors. Since the war, for some reason or other, both in Meursault and in Montrachet, there's been a tendency for the wines to oxidize. As I indicated this morning, we don't know whether that's because they've been using more and more filtration and therefore getting more and more oxidation and therefore adding the SO2 to prevent the oxidation, or what the factors are, whether there's more botrytis in the vineyard now than there was before and so forth. It was, before the war, to my knowledge, almost impossible to buy a white Burgundy that smelled of SO2 in San Francisco. Now, it's almost impossible to buy a white Burgundy that doesn't smell of SO2 in San Francisco. You have to look for it. So there's been a big change in white Burgundies. Now, a few words about these other 3 districts that I've listed here. I watch this a little fast. Beaujolais is the little district just below Burgundy. It's a district of young wines. Gamay they're shipping them at Christmas time. They go to the market in the barrels in March and April, and they're sold directly out of the barrels. They're not bottled as they're doing sometimes shipping to this country. They may lose something for that. I think the wines still have sulfite in them. Much better to have them in a half-full barrel for a week or two. And there is an old fable, or an old wives' tale, in Beaujolais, that the best Beaujolais is the Beaujolais that's a month after the barrel has been opened. That the best Beaujolais is the wine that you, after the barrel has been opened and you start to drink from the barrel, without filling it up, within about a month, it'll be at its best. And I think that's when it's lost all of its sulfide character and has begun to oxidize. Now, it's a very short period of time to drink a wine, just exactly 28 days after the barrel has been opened. And so it isn't a very practical operation for distributing wine. But you hear that. You hear wine merchants who will say that. Yeah, I opened that barrel. It's too young yet to drink the wine. I'll wait a couple of more weeks and it'll be much better. They're also now using what's called maceration carbonique. They've probably always used some of this. this is a process in which the whole grapes are placed in a container, and the container is covered over. These are the Gamay grapes, 2/3 full, whole clusters. And they're left from 5 to 10 days. At that stage, they drain off the free run, which they call paradise, paradis. That's the free run that comes off. It's sort of pink in color. They claim it has a very special flavor. I'll comment on that in a minute. The rest of it is crushed and fermented for a few days up to a week, and then the two are mixed together. Now, what's going on in this period of time when the grapes are uncrushed, or mainly uncrushed, in the tank? Well, that's what it says. They're being carbonically macerated. They are being asphyxiated. How would you like to live under carbon dioxide for a whole week? And what you get is intracellular fermentation of malic acid going to ethyl alcohol inside the cells. The cells lose their semi-permeability. The color that's in the skins flows out, because just like you had scalded the skins, because they've lost their semi-permeability. They're dead cells. The membrane, the cell membrane, has no more semi-permeability. So that's why there's this pink color in the paradis. Any of the juice that's down on the bottom here, or the grapes that are cracked open, and so forth, as they lose the semi-permeability, the color simply runs right out of the skins. So you'll get some of the juice that's coming out with the paradis. About 15 to 20% will come out in the paradis. They claim that this intracellular fermentation that's going on anaerobically, that they're getting some smells. Well, that may be true, because Gamays don't have very much smell of themselves. And that they're also getting a little bit more flavor extraction, because they've got alcohol inside the cells. Inside the cells, not on the outside the cells, but inside the cells. At any rate, they claim these mature earlier, and we don't know what percentage of Beaujolais is made this way now, but a fair percentage of it is. Perhaps a quarter of the Beaujolais wines are made this way. It's a very ancient process, as indicated by the use of words like paradis, which modern winemakers would never think of coining, but the peasant farmers there coined words of this kind, and this process has been used for a long time. It was also used traditionally in the Rioja district of Spain for many years, and I've seen it actually being used there without any relationship to modern research. The French are very keen about this process now, because it makes wines of low tannin content. Makes wines of low tannin content. So they can get them on the market very fast. Get them on the market very fast. So it's being used in the south of France for a lot of those types of wine at the present time. The negative factors about Beaujolais is that they overage very quickly. They get brown very quickly. That they never do develop in the bottle. They never develop very much bouquet. I've never had an old Beaujolais that I thought was worth drinking. I got stuck with a couple of cases of Moulin of Rhone and a Beaujolais a few years ago, and I kept promising myself I would drink them, and time went on, and now it's an effort to drink the bottle, because they're too old and they're oxidized. They're almost sherry-like in some cases. And the other thing about Beaujolais is that nobody in the world knows how many honest Beaujolais there are and how many dishonest Beaujolais there are. In London, they tell you that 80% of them contain some other wine besides Beaujolais. In France, they say that they're 100% Beaujolais, that nobody can get away with that kind of shenanigans. My personal belief is that maybe as many as 50% of the Beaujolais on the market are adulterated in one way or another. I have no way of proving that, I hasten to add, but they don't taste like a good Beaujolais should taste in many cases. The latest rumor is that into the common market, they're night running the wine out of Algiers to Sicily. Then it gets into the common market in Sicily, and then they're shipping it straight away under the common market to Beaujolais and bottling it as Beaujolais. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I was assured just the other day that a man has a friend who has a boat who makes his livelihood doing that. And I'm inclined to believe that it's true. not very far from Palermo over to Algiers, if you look at the map. And they got lots of wine in Algeria. The Rhone, never been as popular as Beaujolais or Burgundy. There's small districts. As I'll point out in class this afternoon, the Châteauneuf-du-Pape only runs about 4,000 acres. Hermitage is smaller than that, and Côte-Rôtie is smaller than that. Those are the three main districts of the Rhone Valley. Starting from the north, Côte-Rôtie, which means the red slope. In the middle of the is Hermitage, and in the far south is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They're all made from different varieties, and I certainly don't want you memorizing the varieties. There are 11 approved varieties for Châteauneuf-du-Pape. There are only one, Syrah, for Hermitage, red Hermitage. There are two, one white and one red, for Côte-Rôtie, so that they're quite mixtured. I think they age rather well. They may not be quite as standardized. It may not be as recognized what a good Châteauneuf-du-Pape is, but I think when you get one, you can tell it has a good bouquet. It's the exception to the rule in France. The warm years are the bad years, with some exceptions. But more often than not, if you look at a wine chart and so forth, you'll find that the Rhone wines, these three wines from the Rhone, in the years where they are poor in other parts of France, that is too cold, in this area they will be quite good and sometimes excellent. And likewise, in some years, like 1959, when the rest of France was just burning up in hot weather, it was too hot in the Rhone Valley, and the grapes got overripe and got moldy and so forth. I'm only going to say a couple of words about the Loire, primarily because I don't think that the Loire makes very many great wines. Most of the wines are rather thin. The reason I want to talk about Sauvignon Blanc, however, is that they don't call it Sauvignon Blanc in the Loire, they call it Blanc Fumé. And I thought we had enough variety names in California without robbing the French of any more names, but lo and behold, about 2 years ago, we began to get Blanc Fumés in California instead of Sauvignon Blanc. So now we have Sauvignon Blancs, and for the same thing, we have Blanc Fumés. One would have been enough. Some people in the industry say that one is too much already, and that two is worse than one. They're not very distinctive in the Loire. They don't get very ripe, so they have taken the lesser name rather than the greater name. Sauvignon Blanc from the Graves is a much better wine than any Blanc Fumé that was ever made in the Loire. So if you were going to copy one of the names, I would have thought that Sauvignon Blanc would have been the one to copy, not the Blanc Fumé, which makes rather thin, uninteresting, low-alcohol wines, which you can't even tell that they're made from Sauvignon Blanc. Maybe that's the reason they decided to use the name in California. That was a joke. There was only a couple people who got that joke. Well, the other variety is Chenin Blanc. That's a perfectly good name, a little hard to pronounce. But then it's also called Pinot Blanc de la Loire, and so we have borrowed that name also now in California. And then we've translated the name, besides borrowing the secondary name for Chenin Blanc is Pinot Blanc de la Loire. Then we translated it and made it White Pinot. So now we have three names for the same thing in California: Chenin Blanc, Pinot Blanc de la Loire, and the wine that is called White Pinot. They're not very distinctive. They're sometimes sweet and sometimes dry. Now, Muscadet is a brand new Appellation controllee. It's only about 10, 12 years old. It's right down at the end of the Loire River. The variety there is Melon, not melon, but Melon. It's the Burgundy. It's the Loire name for Pinot Blanc, true Pinot Blanc, not the Pinot Blanc de la Loire. And I better write those down because French names. The Chenin Blanc is called Pinot, spelled this way, Blanc de la Loire, which they translated this part in California into White Pinot. the true Pinot Blanc, which is a different variety altogether, sometimes called Pinot Blanc Gray, to distinguish it from the Pinot Blanc of the Loire, and putting the word true, that's what Gray means, after the word Pinot Blanc, which after all is spelled differently. Well, that's the Melon. This equals Melon, as near as we can tell. And that variety is now being made into a district wine called Muscadet. It has nothing to do with Muscat. Muscadet is not a Muscat at all. Well, I've overstated my time, so we'll get out of here and let the other class come in.